Hello and welcome to Solopreneur, the show that helps business owners who are flying solo to solve their big sales, marketing and systems challenges one episode at a time. You can watch the video version of this episode at solopreneur.com. I'm Gareth Everson, and on this episode I'm going to be talking about the first of the 5 Ps that I told you about in the last episode around systems management. Remember, I talked about people, processes, platforms, passwords, and products when I introduced the concept of systems management. And today I'm going to be talking about the first of those, which relates to people that are involved in your business, whether they're employed directly or they're associates, partners, suppliers, or even freelancers and digital help that you hire by the project or the task online in today's gig economy. And today I want to challenge you with this question of, if you lost a member of your staff or the web person that helps you or a VA, what would happen in your business? What impact would that have on your business and how you take it forward? So let's get into some stories and some examples and some lessons from some anecdotes that I'm going to tell you about clients or people that I've worked with this year and things that have impacted them. Because if there's a lesson that you can learn from this episode that helps you to improve the way that you manage your people systems in your own business, then we're on to a good thing. So let's get into today's episode. In each of these stories and anecdotes that I'm about to tell you about today, I'm not going to tell you the names of people that are involved. That would be unfair, and they probably wouldn't give me permission to do so anyway, because some of them are a little bit embarrassing. But I want to give you my tips and thoughts about what I would do to help reduce the impact of those situations. And in example 1, it's a small business with a relatively small team that was very happily working away on a number of different projects and initiatives. And in this business, the most junior member of the team was a marketing executive who seemed to love the role that they had in the business, had a great rapport with the whole team that were around them, really got on well, enjoyed the work that they were doing, and seemed to be making good progress. And at a particularly busy time in the business, this member of staff, who had until that week seemingly really enjoyed what they were doing, received an offer to go and work at another business. And it was quite a salary increase for them. It sounded exciting. If anything, they were probably moving into a role that perhaps they weren't fully prepared for by leaving the business that they were in. But as a young and eyes wide open member of the team, they saw an opportunity to go and sort of further their career quite quickly in a different environment and test themselves and earn more by moving. So a great opportunity for this individual, but unfortunately it came at a really critical point in that business's activities. They were mid multiple projects with a number of different clients. There were some really exciting things going on at the time in the business, and everybody that was on that very small team were highly involved in a lot of the activities that they were working on. And because it was a key delivery time, this notice that this young junior marketing executive had to give, the 4 weeks notice, which is pretty standard, wasn't enough to be able to continue with all of their commitments as a business to keep delivering the work that they needed to and the projects that they were working on, both internal and external, and also be able to do a full handover of activities. So what happens in that circumstance? The business owner in this scenario decided that they'd focus on the delivery aspects, and then they'd pull together the knowledge that they had in a team at a time later on when they could kind of review how they picked up some of the activities that were going and leaving the building, if you like, when this young marketing executive left. Now, this scenario could have really impacted them a lot more. It was a business where this young marketing executive had come in at a time when there were other people that were in the team that understood what had gone on in the business. They'd basically come in to provide almost relief for some busy people that were doing multiple different roles, and they were taking some of the responsibilities from them. So in terms of processes and in terms of the day-to-day type things, this business wasn't massively impacted. But there was something that might seem small and innocuous that really did impact them from a continuity perspective. As a business, they ran on Google Workspace, a Google platform that includes all of your mailing services. It uses Gmail for mail. It has a Google Drive, which is an online storage facility and folders facility for online documents and resources and all of that kind of thing, and a variety of other different Google apps that are bundled in that help you manage your business. It's kind of like Microsoft 365 or Office 365 if you're using that as a service. Businesses that have Google Workspace, especially multi-person businesses, tend to adopt its capabilities of being able to share and interact and have multiple people working on things at any one point in time. Now, one thing that they learned from this exercise of this person leaving was that they'd left themselves exposed with this Google Workspace account, that many of the resources that this marketing executive had worked on in the time that they'd been in the building, bearing in mind they were quite junior as well, they'd just worked in their own account. Some really important documents hadn't been shared with the team, and some important communications that had gone backwards and forwards, either with other suppliers or involvement with leads and prospects, were buried in this marketing associate's email inbox. Just, from a technical perspective, Google Workspace, when you move somebody out of your organization, it's called, when you close down that user's account, everything that's in that account gets transferred to another user. You've got that option to migrate those documents, those emails, all of that kind of stuff to another user, which is great from you don't lose anything. That it doesn't go when that person's laptop gets wiped and closed down. You keep all of those materials. But this particular junior marketing associate hadn't really kept a great paper trail, if you like, of all of the resources that they'd worked on, hadn't necessarily used good naming conventions for stuff, hadn't kept great folders of emails and all of that kind of stuff. So what's the outcome of that and this first story? The outcome is just simply this, that when you have people in your team who perhaps with the best will in the world aren't going to be there for life, or the life of the business, should we say, or who are relatively new to the team and therefore probably most likely to be the first people to leave. If they've not been there for years and years and built themselves into the organization, they don't have that kind of connection with the business to keep that continuity going on. So newer members of staff are, generally speaking, more likely to be the first ones to leave, the most likely ones. And so in that scenario, it's probably worthwhile thinking that if you are Google Workspace users or Microsoft 365 users, have a think for those kind of roles, if actually it would be better that that user is logging in to an account that is, say for argument's sake, support at, or office at, or help at, marketing at, something like that as the main username for that account. Now, that doesn't stop you from having alias email addresses that go into that account. So perhaps their first name at your domain name, if that makes sense. So they can have email interactions back and forth by using the email alias. But actually what they're logging into in the account is a username and a user account that continues beyond their involvement in the business. So if you're at a point of hiring your first VA or hiring your first member of staff, or perhaps have partners or suppliers who will be doing work for you and need to store things in a place that is going to be accessible beyond their involvement in your team, give some thought to simply having these more role-based user accounts on services that you use to manage your business. In this particular example, that wouldn't have solved all the challenges that they faced as a business, losing a important, albeit junior, member of the staff in quite a short time frame, but it would have helped them to be able to get a picture of what they had been working on better and have greater clarity of what those resources were. And most importantly, give the person that was then coming into the business next that better continuity and that better visibility of what had gone before. So they'd be able to access their inbox, for example, or they'd be able to access and see the resources that they've been working on in that Google Drive or that shared folder, to be able to see how they should do things moving forward. Simple systems like that, with a continuity and a structure of where we put things, how we do things, how we communicate, how we put things into folders, and how we report on things, is something that often goes overlooked by fairly experienced professionals who are business owners, who will often overlook or not give a second thought to the fact that more junior members of the team, or more temporary or more part-time members of the team, probably wouldn't be thinking about if they're just there to do their role and complete tasks and that kind of thing. So give that some thought. My second example today is a business owner that was a classic solopreneur. They had started their business from a passion project, and it had blossomed and developed and grown through word of mouth, through some pretty good self-driven marketing, but it got to the point where this business owner had become too busy to be able to run all of the marketing activities alongside doing the client work as well. So this particular business owner, about 18 months before this issue happened, had hired a marketing agency to take on the digital marketing side of their business. And whilst it wasn't cheap, this agency had taken on doing lead generation through ads, had taken on replatforming their website, and setting up resources that allowed them to be able to capture leads into the business that were segmented, that then could go into a relatively simple follow-up process that got them to the point of being ready to have sales conversations with this business owner. So it was, for want of a better term, of not wanting to make it sound too grand, an outsourced marketing function. An agency was doing some of the core activities of generating interest in this person's business. But over the course of this relationship that this business owner had had with this agency, there were some, if not fully red flags, then definitely some slightly pink flags relating to some of the conversations that they'd had. Work was starting to take a little bit longer to get completed. Some of the ad campaigns weren't being refreshed all that often. The A/B testing of activities had dropped away, and the business owner was starting to get slightly concerned that projects weren't happening in the same sort of thoroughness that they had done at the start of the relationship. And this person had also got wind that the agency was doing things in a different area and was starting to focus its energies on an entirely different niche to the one that this client's business operated in. And long story short, this all culminated in a conversation, a really frustrating conversation with the agency owner, who announced to the business owner that they could no longer carry on with them as a client. They were taking an entirely different direction, and they were moving forward with something else. I've worked with a lot of agencies, and I would say that most agencies would, in that circumstance, diligently hand over that client to somebody else. But in this circumstance, the integrity of the agency owner wasn't, shall we say, at that level, and basically just dropped the client and let them pick up the pieces. Now, this business owner had put a lot of reliance and a lot of activities in the direction of the agency's way, and there was a real risk that they were going to lose their business. They were introduced to me through somebody that I'd worked with in the past, and I was able to help them with some of their more systems-oriented, some of the more process-oriented activities to help keep those running. I didn't really get involved in the creative aspects of it, but I was able to pick up some of the pieces to help this business owner to continue on with their business. But as we came to work together, there were a number of different things that came up during the process of me onboarding them and trying to keep business going as usual. One of the big ones was that the business owner had, in outsourcing that relationship to an agency or the marketing to an agency had either not thought to ask how these things happened or not sought to get the training on these things so that they could do some of this themselves or understand it themselves, or had treated the marketing as almost like a black box activity where they didn't really want to get involved. And I get that. Sometimes I encounter clients where the digital side of their marketing is, to them, pretty complex and difficult to understand and difficult to grasp and not something that they ever want to manage if they don't have to. But what I would say to that is that even if you're working with an associate or a VA or an agency, they all have holidays. You don't want to be in a situation where you can't at least have continuity during those downtimes. Things happen, things break, or you get ideas and want to put something in place quickly. I would say it's ever so important for you to have in your organization, even if it's an organization of one, to have a knowledge that exists in there that goes beyond people that you're outsourcing to or having work on your activities themselves. This example was made worse by the fact that as we dug into some of the scenarios of what had gone on with this agency, first of all, some of the licenses for digital assets that were being used in that business had expired or weren't accessible anymore or were just unavailable to us. So that created what I'd describe as this technical debt of an inability to be able to continue to use something in the way that it had been first designed. So all of that money that this business owner had invested in those resources wasn't something that was going to last a lifetime that it should have done. They basically stopped working as this agency pulled out from that relationship, which to me felt really wrong. So a key lesson here from this second example, always have a backup plan and always have a good enough understanding and a training with whatever providers that you're working with, that you can do some of the key processes that are involved in the day-to-day transactional side of things, whether that's creating a blog post or creating some of the digital media assets or posting to social media or whatever it happens to be. Always have access to be able to do that yourself and stress test that process. You might work with a provider and they do most of the work for a month or so down the line, but make sure that before you end that relationship with them, before you're in a situation where one of you is ready to move on, make sure you have that understanding of how those things work. And with regards to the licensing aspect, I would say that whilst agencies do get agency licenses for things, which is great because it reduces your overall costs when they do that, if there are elements of projects that are being bought as one-offs or are specific to you as the client, try and get those licenses in your ownership. So if it's a specific plugin on a website, for example, WooCommerce or its add-ons are a classic example of this, try to get those licenses under yourself, even if it seems like it results in you paying slightly more. Another example from another client recently is where she'd stopped working with an agency and the website was already out of date. And when I came to do a review of what it was and do some updates for them, the license for the theme that the WordPress website had been built in had expired even 2 years before she'd stopped working with this agency. So the lesson here is, even if it seems like somebody is taking work off your hands and doing that as an associate or an outsourced agency or a VA, make sure that you have full control and full understanding about the way that things work. And even if it's an internal member of staff who's doing things for you, always make sure that you have a knowledge share activity that goes on when things get done, so the knowledge doesn't leave, either when it's a third party with the relationship ending, or if it's an internal member of staff that's done some of this work, the knowledge doesn't leave the building when that person leaves that role. Okay, let's look at a third example. And this is so innocuous that anybody that's listening to this podcast might put themselves in this scenario themselves and not realize it. And in this example, it's another solopreneur business owner who works with multiple different associates and VAs to help them produce resources for their business. And in this scenario, it's a VA that's doing work in Canva for this business owner, creating branding assets for this person's business to use on social media, on the website, and in various different other places. Using a VA is a really cost-effective way of being able to scale yourself and be able to make more of the time that you have that's available in your working week. It means you're not bogged down in software that isn't your greatest skill set, and you can get your ideas scaled up and out to the world more effectively than you could do without them. Now, in this scenario, this VA that was working for my client created some branding assets that had errors in them. For one reason or another, the business owner and the VA hadn't picked up on the fact that a couple of slightly incorrect colors were being used, some misplaced fonts were being used that weren't in line with this client's core brand. And what then happened with this project that had some deadlines that were associated with it was a scenario where there was a lot of back and forth between the business owner and the VA to be able to correct these things. And what surprised me in this particular scenario was that, in this example, the VA was using Canva, which is a really popular design tool, if you like, hated by designers, but loved by business owners because it's relatively straightforward to build marketing assets that follow a consistency of other marketing assets that you produce. What turned out from this particular scenario is that instead of using this business's own Canva account to produce these assets and giving them a team access to the account, which, to be fair, does cost a little bit more to have multiple users on a Canva account, this scenario, the business owner had hired the VA to complete these activities, but had let the VA basically use their own Canva account. This leaves you exposed to a number of different things. If you stop working with the VA, obviously you don't have access to their account. You don't have access to their account anyway, so you can't go in there and make quick edits yourself or download something in a slightly different format or size. It also introduces a greater likelihood of mistakes happening. If you're using your own Canva account, you have the ability to create your own brand kits in the account that are fully compliant with everything that you have set up by way of your core colors, your fonts, your logos, your image type assets. If you're giving that responsibility to a virtual assistant who doesn't really have that knowledge or that understanding of what all of those things are, nor the assets in place in the first place, the likelihood of them coming close to your specifications is massively reduced. So this doesn't just apply to Canva, but if there are other digital tools that you're using to create or build or shape the way that you run your business, make sure that they are your assets, that they are your logins, and that you're securely giving access to those resources to anybody that's working on them. This is increasingly prevalent. The amount of on-computer applications that we use these days is reducing more and more. We're using far more online pieces of software or apps to get our stuff done. ChatGPT and Claude AI, they're both online resources. Canva is an online design tool when we used to have to install huge applications, Photoshop or what have you, on our own devices in the past. Even this tool that I'm using to record this podcast is on Riverside, and I then do my final edits in a different tool called Alitu. They're all online tools. Most of these online tools that we use have the capabilities to have multiple users on there, whether it's included in the license that you've got, the recurring monthly license that you're using for it, or whether you need to upgrade and pay for another user. Don't have key things, key processes that are done in your business run on somebody else's logins to their own app. Don't make the mistake of hiring somebody to help you with Canva or some audio editing or some video editing. And just because they're using the same tool as you, don't make the mistake of thinking everything will be fine, because if they're just using their login to their own software to do your work, then those resources will only be available to that person. And it will ultimately result in a number of different things for you. One, if there's problems with it, you can't go in and make quick edits, and you're reliant on having that two-way conversation with them to get it fixed. Two, any resources or assets that you create go away when that person stops working with you, so you don't have access to reuse them or repurpose them or do things with them. And thirdly, just from a pure quality and standardization perspective, it introduces the real risk of your processes not being able to get followed. If you get any pushback on this, then what I would say is it's probably the wrong partner to be working with. Specialists in whatever field it is, whether it's design, audio, production, development, will grasp the importance of these things and you having control and ownership of these assets moving forward. So I hope this episode and the 3 examples that I've talked through there give you a good insight into how to manage the people side of your systems management. I've not given you the A to Z in everything that you need to manage people-wise, but I've given you 3 examples there of scenarios that could easily have been avoided had those business owners thought ahead at some of the consequences of decisions that they took with how they built those relationships, either with the members of staff in their business and the way that they managed continuity of staff in their business, or the way that they managed the work that outsourced agencies and third parties were working for them, or they'd had the insights to be able to think ahead that even though a VA or a freelancer was using the same tools as them, that actually those tools had no real transferability of what was being designed and developed on there. Certainly increases complexity to try to do that. So let's just cut that out and let's just have people using and developing things on our own assets, on our own accounts, with obviously the right controls in place. Hope there's some good food for thought for you in there. As always, you can find the show notes on the website. And if you want to discuss any of the topics that I talk about on the pod, don't hesitate to contact me directly. The best way to do that is to find me on LinkedIn. And if you use the URL askgareth.com, that will take you to my profile where we can connect if you want to. But if you don't want to, my DMs are open anyway, and let's have a conversation from there. So thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next show where we'll be talking about the platforms that we use in our business. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Solopreneur Podcast. Remember that what we learned today builds more value if there's a plan to take action on it tomorrow. So head to solopreneur.com and check out our growing community of action takers and all the training and software that you need to build a scalable business without breaking the bank. And if you value the show, please help others to discover it too by leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts or by sharing a link to an episode on LinkedIn or wherever your finger does its scrolling.